On Christmas Eve, Walter Hawthorne, a billionaire who could buy almost anything, sat at a plain little table in the Maple and Oak Diner, looking like any other old man, while snow tapped against the window behind him. Across from him, his wife didn't touch her food. She just stared at the table, the way someone does when they're tired of asking for the same thing. The waitress, Mia, came over with a steaming plate and set it down carefully, a tenderness that didn't match the rush of the place. And in that same moment, she slipped a hand into her apron and made a silent choice. The kind nobody notices right away, but that ends up shifting the whole course of the night. Mia Carter, a 21-year-old waitress, had already learned how to smile with her mouth and hide the exhaustion in her eyes. That December week, Seattle's wet cold clung to people's skin, and the Maple and Oak Diner stayed packed with folks chasing hot coffee and some kind of comfort. Behind the counter, though, Mia was doing quiet math. The extra hours, the crumpled tips in her apron pocket, the mental checklist of everything missing at home. Her dad, Harold, didn't complain much, but his cough had sunk deeper, heavier, like his chest was dragging a weight. When her shift ended, she never went straight home. She'd stop at the corner market, grab the cheapest version of whatever they needed most, and still stand in the aisle doing calculations like someone walking across a rope bridge. The medicine the doctor had mentioned at the last appointment sounded like something from another planet. Hard name, harder price. Mia didn't have good health insurance, didn't have rich relatives, didn't have a plan B. What she did have was discipline, a phone full of alarms, and a quiet stubbornness that if she just kept going, maybe it would be enough. There was one detail almost nobody saw. Mia couldn't throw food away without feeling a knot in her stomach. When the manager told them to dump plates that came back nearly untouched, she swallowed hard and looked away. Sometimes, at the end of the night, she would quietly pull aside whatever was still whole bread, sides nobody had touched, and tuck it into a simple container, wrapped up like leftovers that didn't matter. Outside, near the alley where the rain streaked down the concrete, a few kids would show up with jackets far too thin and eyes far too sharp. Mia handed the food over without a speech, just a soft, "Here, eat slow," like it was the most normal thing in the world. If you love stories that start small, can suddenly squeeze your chest without warning, stick around and subscribe, because a lot changes when someone chooses to be decent, even when they don't have anything extra. Every one of those gestures had a price, and Mia knew it. That night, standing under the leaking awning waiting for the bus, she opened her wallet and looked at the bills folded there, separated with care. It was the money for Harold's medicine. A car splashed through a puddle in the street. A Christmas song leaked faintly from somewhere, mixed with the sound of rain. Mia snapped the wallet shut like she was protecting a secret and took a deep breath, because tomorrow was Christmas Eve, and the diner always felt different then. That's when she noticed something strange near the restaurant door. Two shadows standing outside, shivering, like they were trying to decide whether to come in or give up. On Christmas Eve, the Maple and Oak Diner seemed louder than usual. Big laughter, silverware clinking, an old radio trying to push Christmas songs over the sound of sizzling oil and conversation. Outside, Seattle was damp and cutting, wind slapping cold droplets against the glass. In the middle of that, Mia watched her manager, Rick, march across the floor with that walk of someone who's already decided he wouldn't listen to anyone. Near the entrance, an older man, Walter, and an older woman, June, stood hunched in coats that were too thin, looking around like they'd walked into the wrong world. Rick didn't bother to hide his impatience. He pointed toward the door with an open palm and spoke low but sharp, just loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "We're packed. You'll need to leave." Walter opened his mouth like he was going to explain, but his voice came out weak, swallowed by the noise. June gripped his arm, trying to keep her posture, but her face already showed that quiet shame that hurts to watch. Mia froze for a second, order pad in hand, feeling her blood heat up while the rest of the room pretended not to see. She took a steadying breath, dropped the pad on the counter, and moved through the aisle before Rick could push the door open to help them out. "Hey, I'll take care of them," she said, firm but not loud, with a kind of certainty that didn't match how small she was. Rick looked her up and down like he was calculating the loss, then let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "Mia, don't start something tonight." But she'd already pulled a small table over by the wall, near a heater that made more noise than warmth. "Sit here, please," she said, looking at June first, as if apologizing for the whole world without saying the words. When she brought the food, it wasn't the cheapest thing. It was real comfort. Hot soup, fresh bread, a simple but dignified plate. Walter held the spoon with shaking hands, and June just watched the steam, like the smell itself was an old relief. "We'll pay when we can," Walter murmured, avoiding her eyes. "Not tonight," Mia said quickly, shaking her head. "Tonight you just eat. Later, when Rick passed by the register, the check popped up on the screen, and Mia, with no audience and no drama, pulled the folded bills from her apron pocket. It was Harold's medicine money. She paid anyway, throat tight, trying not to think about what she'd say at home. She didn't notice that, on the edge of the table, June had left a small folded card, discreet enough to be missed, a detail that would come back to Mia in a way she wasn't remotely prepared for. Later that same night, Mia trudged into her tiny apartment with a body begging for bed and a mind buzzing like static. The old heater crackled in the corner, the diner's smell still clung to her clothes, and the street outside sounded like a corridor of wet wind. She slipped in quietly so she wouldn't wake Harold, who was asleep on the couch under a blanket that was way too thin. She paused and studied his face for a moment, the tired way he breathed, and felt the weight of the money she'd spent earlier, like she'd ripped a piece of herself out with it. She hadn't even taken off her shoes when she noticed something by the door. A neatly arranged basket, wrapped with care, a modest Christmas bow tied around it, like someone had left it and hurried off. It wasn't from a neighbor. It wasn't from a friend. Mia just stared at it, with the same feeling you get when life hands you a bill you never asked for. Stranger still, on top of the basket sat a folded card, the same simple style June had left on the table, as if someone knew exactly what they were doing. Mia carried the basket inside and opened it carefully, almost afraid there'd be some kind of catch. Inside were small but thoughtful things, pantry staples that would last, a wool scarf, a pair of gloves, and a brown envelope at the bottom like the heart of the whole thing. On the card, just a few words. No drama, no long explanation. "Thank you for seeing us." That was it. Mia read it again and again. It seemed crazy that someone would thank her for something that, in her mind, was just the bare minimum. Her throat tightened, not with simple joy, but with that confused emotion that hits when someone returns a gesture, and you realize maybe you weren't as invisible as you thought. The card was still in her hand when her phone buzzed with some random notification, and the silence of the apartment grew louder. She looked over at Harold sleeping and asked herself, who would do this? For a moment, she almost convinced herself it was just a pretty thank you, and nothing more. But one detail refused to sit right. At the bottom of the note, there was a tiny symbol, almost faded, a mark, like the logo of something bigger. And Maya was going to see that same mark up close, because before she could make sense of any of it, the door of the Maple and Oak Diner was going to open again for that couple. Only this time, they wouldn't walk in like people apologizing for existing. Later that night, the Maple and Oak Diner had lost its peak crowd, but it was still far from empty. The warm lights bounced off the puddles outside, and the smell of burned coffee hung in the air like the last thing that ever left. Mia was wiping down a table when the door opened, and a sharp wave of cold cut through the heat. She looked up on autopilot and froze Walter and June were back, but they no longer looked like a lost couple looking for shelter. They walked in calmly, warmly dressed, clothes neat, posture solid, like people who belong wherever they decide to sit. Mia felt her stomach drop in that strange way that isn't fear of them, but fear that she'd misunderstood everything. She walked toward the table slowly, gripping the rag in her hand as if it could steady her. "Are you okay?" she managed, voice low. June smiled differently, this time, more open, though her eyes stayed serious. "We are, thanks to you." Walter didn't waste time on small talk. "We came back because we needed to look you in the eye, not just to say thank you, but to make something right." Mia blinked, confused. "I just served you dinner." Walter pulled a small card from his coat, the same little symbol from the note on the basket, and set it on the table facing her. It was the name of a foundation, something that sounded too big to fit inside that noisy diner. Hawthorne Harbor Foundation. "We weren't here by accident," he said, his voice calm, almost heavy. "We do have money, a lot of it. But what we're looking for, you can't buy." June finished the thought without theatrics. "We look for people who still see others when nobody's watching." Mia felt the back of her neck heat up. The word foundation made her think of donations, scams, clickbait stories online. She almost took a step back. "Look, I don't want any trouble," she blurted, glancing toward the counter like Rick might appear out of nowhere. Walter lifted a hand, steady. "No trouble. No cameras. No posts. No strings." He opened a slim folder and laid things out with the practicality of someone closing a deal. They'd already looked into Harold's case. They were in touch with a partner clinic. They'd secured full treatment, not just the medicine. And on top of that, there was a clear plan for Mia. Tuition, enrollment, everything paid. Mia stared at the paper like it was written in a language she didn't speak. "Why?" she whispered, voice cracking, because deep down that was the only honest question. June drew a slow breath before answering. "Because last night you treated us like people, and you paid a real price for it." Mia thought of the medicine money, thought of her dad's rough breathing on the couch, thought of the cold on Walter and June's faces at the door. She squeezed the rag in her hand so hard her fingers hurt, fighting back tears. That was exactly when she heard Rick's voice cut across the diner from the counter, sharp and annoyed. "Mia, what's going on over there?" And in that tone, she could already hear it. This conversation was about to blow up in a way she never saw coming. Walter and June didn't make a scene, didn't raise their voices, didn't ask for attention. They just sat at that corner table like they were fixing something simple, and, at the same time, impossible. While Mia tried to catch up with what was happening, Walter was already on the phone with someone, speaking in short, firm sentences. Within minutes, a car would arrive to take Harold to a partner clinic. June turned to Mia with a calm, almost like a mother's. "You can finish your shift. We'll wait." Weirdly, that sentence hurt the most, because nobody had ever waited for Mia before. She worked another hour with her hands shaking, poured coffee, cleared plates, wiped counters. But her mind stayed with Harold on that couch, with his chest heaving. Rick passed by twice, trying to figure out who the important customers were. The moment he realized there was serious money at that table, his whole posture flipped. Big smile, forced politeness, a rush to look like the nicest boss in the world now that rich people were watching. Mia didn't argue. She just finished what needed finishing, grabbed her bag, and stepped into the cold with Walter and June, feeling like Seattle's wind had grown sharper. On the way to the clinic, nobody talked about millions, destiny, or anything grand. Walter asked for Harold's full name, age, allergies, current meds. Small, human questions, the kind you ask when you actually plan to care for someone. By the time they arrived, the front desk was ready, and Mia watched something that nearly buckled her knees. A doctor calling her father by name, calmly, with no next tone in his voice. Harold, still weak, tried to joke. "You must have the wrong guy," and Mia squeezed his hand, eyes burning. If that moment hit something in you, tell me in the comments what moved you most. A lot of us carry similar stories alone, without even realizing it. Even there, with everything set in motion, Walter and June stayed as grounded as they'd been in the diner. No photographers, no speeches. No, we're going to transform your life, theatrics. Just a folder of documents, a pen, and a short line. When you're ready, we'll take care of your enrollment too. Mia watched her father being guided down the hallway and felt a strange kind of shame for having distrusted the world so completely. Before she could catch her breath, June nodded subtly toward a nurse's phone. Someone had recognized the couple and was filming from a distance. Right then, Mia realized something. What had started in total quiet might find a voice far beyond anything she'd planned. Later that same Christmas Eve, Mia sat in a silent hallway at the clinic, holding a cup of lukewarm water like it was an anchor. Behind the door, Harold had finally stopped coughing that terrifying way and was asleep under careful monitoring. The shine of the freshly waxed floor made everything feel a little unreal, like the whole night had been staged. A few steps away, Walter and June, the billionaire couple behind the Hawthorne Harbor Foundation, spoke softly with someone from the medical staff. No fuss, no hurry to be seen. Just handling what needed to be handled. Walter walked over with a slim folder and that practical tone of someone making an offer, but also honoring a no. He didn't shove papers at her. He simply set the folder beside her and said, "We'll take care of Harold now, and whatever comes next." Mia swallowed. Whatever comes next was exactly the part she'd never been able to see. June, still holding her gloves, added, "And you're not going to carry this alone anymore." In that cold hallway, the future didn't sound like some pretty promise. It sounded like a simple human contract, the kind nobody signs, but everyone feels. Soon after, Walter asked Mia to come with him to a small meeting room in the clinic, used for quick consults. It was nothing fancy. Plain chairs, a tiny Christmas tree in the corner decorated by someone who clearly did it more out of affection than style. There, Mia heard the details. The foundation had a quiet program of scholarships and support for people who, under pressure, still chose what was right, even when it hurt their wallet. She didn't have to prove anything. What she'd done at the diner had already spoken for her. When Mia tried to pull back, "I'm nobody," June just answered softly. "That's exactly why we came back." Before leaving, June had one simple request. "We've got a small team serving dinner at a shelter nearby tonight. Nothing fancy. Just hot food and people who don't want to be treated like they're invisible. Would you be willing to stop by for half an hour?" Mia hesitated, glancing toward her father's room, but the doctor assured her Harold would be fine for a while. At the shelter, she ended up doing what she always did, helping serve. At some point, without her noticing, someone recorded a short clip of her saying quietly that seeing people doesn't to cost much. Until the day it costs everything. That little video, posted right there that night, began hopping from phone to phone, and Mia had no idea how far its echo was about to reach. It was past 11 when Mia stepped out of the shelter back into Seattle's wet streets, scarf tight around her neck and her mind spinning. The wind cut like a blade, but inside she felt strangely warm. Not with silly happiness, but with that kind of emotion that leaves you a little unsteady. In her pocket, her phone buzzed nonstop, and she didn't quite dare to look. The last image burned into her mind was simple. People holding plates with both hands, as if they were also holding on to their own dignity. Back at the clinic, the hallway felt calmer. Harold was still sleeping, breathing easier now, and that alone felt like a solid miracle, the kind that doesn't need a pretty quote. Mia leaned against the doorway and watched him for a while, quiet, like she was afraid of waking their luck. Then she finally checked her phone. The video from the shelter, that short clip where she spoke softly about seeing people, was being shared by local pages, neighborhood groups, even bigger profiles. There was no full story, no foundation name plastered everywhere. Just her real tired face and the kind of truth that doesn't sound rehearsed. Walter and June appeared at the end of the hallway like they didn't want to interrupt. Walter lifted a hand in a small gesture, telling her not to worry. We've already asked some folks to blur the shelter's name. We're not turning this into a circus, he said. June nodded toward Mia's phone. But we can't control everything. Sometimes people just need to believe someone like you still exists. Mia swallowed. That was a new kind of weight. It wasn't fame. It was exposure. And yet she realized what had gone viral wasn't really her. It was the act. The choice. Back in Harold's room, she sat on the hard chair beside his bed and pulled out the card she still carried. Thank you for seeing us. She ran her finger over the letters slowly, as if she were finally understanding what they meant. Outside, the city kept rushing. Christmas lights reflecting in puddles, people in a hurry, people alone. And inside, a waitress who could barely afford medicine had changed the course of 3 lives just by refusing to look away. And the strangest part? Before this night was truly over, someone was still going to ask Mia one simple, dangerous question. A question that would decide how this story would be remembered. At the end of that Christmas Eve, there was no stage, no camera flash, no perfect movie ending. There was a plain table, hot food cooling slowly, and 3 people realizing, each in their own way, that life can be cruel. But it can also surprise you when someone decides not to be one more person, pushing others out into the cold. Walter and June went home with the same money they always had, but with something they hadn't. Tea bought in a long time. The feeling of being treated like human beings without needing to prove anything first. And Mia walked out of that diner with her chest tight, because her kindness hadn't been cheap. It cost her a real choice at a moment when she herself was hanging by a thread. But for the first time in a long time, she wasn't carrying that weight on her own. The help that reached her door wasn't there to decorate her story. It was there to repair a piece of the world that was cracking right in front of everyone. Maybe the hardest and most beautiful truth is this. It wasn't a speech that changed everything. It was a plate set down with respect. It was someone who looked at 2 older strangers and didn't see a problem, but 2 lives. And when you do that, you never really control what happens next. Sometimes the gesture comes back. Sometimes it grows into a chain. Sometimes it just sits there quietly, saving someone from the inside out. Now tell me honestly, if you were in Mia's shoes, would you have done the same thing, knowing what that money meant back home? And which moment hit you hardest? When they were being pushed out the door, when the steaming plate landed on the table, or when that simple "thank you for seeing us" stayed hanging in the air? Share it in the comments. I really do read them. If this story touched you, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Because there are still a lot of people out there living in silence, just waiting for one pair of eyes that refuses to treat anybody like they're invisible.